Australian man is a pot-bellied, beer-swilling chauvinist or a sensitive, caring creature? And which one would Australian women prefer?
To everyone who's here, and especially to my parents, who have been wonderful parents, I'm sorry to leave you all, but in a way I'm happy to be going to Australia where I have a new chance to start over again. Thank you very much, everybody.
John Chapman, a clerk from Essex, is about to leave family and friends in Waltham Abbey to start a new life in Australia. At a farewell party, he reassures his sad schoolteacher wife, Siobhan. This is August 1973, and there, Mr. and Mrs. Average Migrant, setting out from Southampton with 734 other Britons in a Greek ship bound for Perth, all looking for a better life.
Good luck, copper boy. Down under. I'll write to you pretty soon, OK?
For parents, it's a weepy, gulpy moment. For John and Siobhan, it's facing a new world together. In Australia, John went to work for Ford's and then a construction company. They had 2 children and a new car every year. In this empty land, they seemed a traditionally contented migrant family with a future happily predictable. But their new dream life turned into a melodrama acted out in loneliness 12,000 miles from home. If you were starting out again on that boat for that terrible voyage out here, what would you do differently here?
Whether it's here or anywhere else, I think you've got to decide exactly what you want, and if both of you want it, exactly what both of you want. And having decided that, then
you become completely one-eyed about it and do it.
Yeah, I come from a large family, and I know what large families or children can do to people. It's hard. As soon as you have children, it changes the relationship dramatically. It's not just a simple change, it's a dramatic change. And Siobhan wanted children, and I try to tell you that it's not quite what it is on television, having children. And I think he was a bit surprised how hard it was, being stuck indoors with someone as difficult as Rebecca was. And then I was really working until 9 o'clock at night, quite regularly. And then I come home and you know, Siobhan didn't trust me, actually. I wasn't playing around or anything, but she didn't really trust me. Are you okay?
Yeah.
You sure? Anyway, I met a girl that worked for me, actually, and she was quite an entrancing person. I was very emotionally messed up at that time, and I just sent you home, didn't I?
Just after Nathan was born.
That's
Nathan
right.
was 3 weeks old.
And so when Siobhan left, I said, okay, look, you know, when this is all over, and I'll be about a year, and I'll come back and I'll see you then. And then after about 3 months after you had left, and I found out that it was all sort of a fantasy.
But despite all this, you still started a second family with this other lady.
Yes, I did. She wanted a family, so we had a family. And we had a very, very beautiful child. And then I came back here, and while we was here, we actually lost that child. She was drowned over there. She was a beautiful little girl, Karina.
She was drowned?
Yes, in the irrigation channel over there. And we had a second child by that time. And then when Karina died, we had a third child about 10 months later. And she was deaf, totally deaf. And that's Angelina.
Now, how did you two get back together again after what seems like an irrevocable break?
This other lady's Nancy, and she took off. And since then we've had rather a bitter time, actually. I don't know why, but it's turned out very bitter and very expensive and not very nice at all.
But at least you two got together again.
We got back. See, we'd always been friends, and this
always remained friends.
And this is one of the
Strangely
hassles with Nancy because Nancy hates Siobhan and Siobhan hates Nancy. And
Naturally enough.
yes. So that always used to cause lots of trouble.
But what about all his celebrated male chauvinism? Was that stimulated by life in Australia?
Yes, I suppose it probably was, because the males here do tend to be very chauvinistic, I think.
Is this his mateship and going down to the pub and that sort of thing?
There's partly that, and also having ideas that you want to do something.
So I suppose you if that's your character, it would have been the same character back in Waltham Abbey.
It's different here. It's
More temptations, easier, she'll be right.
a little bit of She'll Be Right, and it's a little bit more chauvinistic as far as men are concerned.
Ah, yes.
If you want to go out, you go out.
That's right, yes. And you've got to stay here looking at the formula food and doing the cooking.
Right. Something like that.
Would you say that your lives here in Australia have been a success now, looking back over these 13 years?
Yes and no. It's a weird, we're in a weird, peculiar situation. I mean, if we'd sort of been together the whole time, then we could probably say yes. But come back in another 10 years and we'll say yes, I think.
In Australia, the liberated male who had to cope with the harsh world of the Outback has always accepted the legend of his chauvinism in dealing with the women who made such a life tolerable. In the steam heat of northern Queensland, a country race meeting at Townsville, Australia's largest tropical city. Among the racegoers, a London girl who was a bunny croupier in the Park Lane Playboy Club. She came out 17 years ago with her pit boss boyfriend to open Australia's first casino in Hobart. But they and some other Playboy Club couples had to get married first, because in those days the staid Isle of Tasmania wasn't quite ready for gambling and a casino staff living in sin. Her husband, Ron, now runs Townsville's new hotel casino, while Sally Hurley studies psychology at the university here and stands in the front line of Australia's battle of the sexes.
I had a few fairly nasty experiences before I understood what was going on. And one of them, the very first nightclub I went to, I was introduced to a gentleman by a very dear friend, so I assumed that the gentleman was a gentleman. And we're having a chat, and we got down to what do you do for a living, and he said that he was a pathologist. So I laughed and I said, oh, will you marry me, because I know how much money you make. And he took a few steps backwards and he looked me up and down, and he said, oh, I have to try the goods first. And went, he said, no, you haven't had a mastectomy, all right.
Ah.
And the only reason I didn't hit him, he was about this tall. And it's very much the attitude that you are fair game. There's no particular treatment of you as a female. There's no niceties.
Do you think he goes around Townsville feeling ladies?
Undoubtedly. It's it's an accepted thing. There's no appreciation of your femininity or your modesty. You're fair game and you're there, and if you don't comply with what they want, well, you're in the wrong.
Well, after he'd done that to you, what were you expecting? You expected to regard it as a joke, were you?
Yes,
this
oh
little
yeah,
invasion,
yes.
invasion
oh
of
yes,
your...
yes, it was a very funny joke and I was supposed to laugh and think he was a terrific guy.
Yes.
But I just couldn't cope with it. I mean, quite basically, if I went up and did a reciprocal action and asked him if he had his testicles off, I don't know how he would have felt about that. But nobody does things like that. And,
So it's curious because they're a good-looking race, aren't they? There's no doubt about it. I mean, your Outback Aussie is an attractive figure, I find.
as a figure, I don't find them attractive because they don't care particularly what sort of image they're putting across to you. They don't worry too much about how they dress and how they appear. I think we've got a little instance here today where we have a very beautiful lady. I think you've seen her. In
those
the red dress.
Skin-tight red leather.
Yes, will you stop
Yes.
dribbling?
But I mean, at this temperature, that's really... She's suffering for her art, isn't she?
Yeah. And
But-
she looks superb.
Yeah.
She looks lovely, and she probably took a lot of hours and a lot of money to get dressed up like that. And the gentleman's got a Popeye shirt on.
You see,
Not
this
on.
happens all over, doesn't it, here? I mean, I noticed that the men are always dressed in a fairly relaxed sort of way, and the women have made enormous effort. They're all they're wearing their hats, and they've been to the couturier, and they've bought all sorts of things. Some of them through mail order, no doubt.
That's right.
But I mean, they have made an effort, and the men have not made any effort at all.
No, because you're basically a possession, and possessions you have to be proud of. So the lady is a possession and she looks good, and the man will probably pay for her to look good, but it's patriarchal. He's the dominant one. Doesn't matter what he looks like, he's a prize catch anyway because he's a male. Oh, this sounds terrible, but it's so true. It's ridiculous.
There's
it's
no...
really true.
You're saying that they don't have to woo, is that it?
No, they just go
Right.
like that.
So how do women cope here?
With great difficulty. They marry early. They marry very early, or they form very safe little feminine groups which are self-defeating because in the end they become very insular, and the men they haven't got the courage, the confidence to approach these groups of women, and they form little cliques, and they're the friendships, they depend upon each other, but they don't ultimately find what they're looking for because the men aren't allowed in or don't want to come in.
So the women are in self-protective groups, and the men are in the pub.
Yes, one big mateship, yes.
Now, what about mateship? Does this operate more up here in the north than in the Metropoli?
No, I think it's very much alive and well in the cities, but here you do have more of a drinking situation. The mateship
Because
is
of this
still...
scorching climate, you mean?
Oh, that's a good excuse, yes.
All right, okay.
Oh, the drinking mateship originated, if we are to believe the sociologists, from the early days when there were no women and very few women were all married, so there were no prostitutes. The standard of the woman was very high because they were in limited supply. So to sublimate their sexual desires, they found that they'd meet in the pub and they'd have a warm feeling with the comradeship with the men, with the drink. They'd start yahooing, as you see them still doing, and they would release all that sexual energy. And it was in fact not macho to actually talk about women or sex. And I think this is obviously going, but it's still very much so. There's no romanticism. There's nothing between wanting a lady and getting her.
In films and fiction, most of Australia's wonderful brutes live in places like Catherine, a Northern Territory township a couple of 100 miles south of Darwin, on the very edge of the Never Never. Claire Jucker and Neil Beaton arrived here on a motorbike, wearing their leathers and carrying a guitar. But they were not a couple of hippies passing through. Claire and Neil are two young doctors, now giving this conservative little outpost a fresh medical experience. Dr. Claire, one of 9 children of a Liverpool wages clerk, is 23. She works in the Aboriginal camps in the mornings and in the afternoon sees her white patients at Catherine's clinic, where, as the town's first woman doctor, she came as something of a surprise.
We'd heard all about the Aussie male, and that when we were going to meet them, that they might not offer me their hand to shake their hand, so I just had to sort of nod acknowledgement. And so we arrived at this practice, and they'd been short of doctors for a while. And I remember one of the major guys of the practice coming up, big guy he was, and sort of well balanced. He had a chip on both shoulders, which is what we find about most Australians. He sort of says, oh, well, I suppose 1.5 doctors are better than none.
But I mean, you're a young blonde, you wear mini skirts and bracelets on your ankle and blonde hair and cleavage. This is not at all the mother figure that they expect to find.
Oh, but I think they take you for your values as well. I mean, the way you talk to them.
Uh-huh.
And I feel that, I mean, I sometimes feel very dubious about the elderly woman that comes in and asks me advice about the fact that her husband goes out bush and she has relationship problems with him, asking me, a young girl who's only had relationships for a couple of years of her life, advice. I find that really difficult to cope with, but these women are up in the territory, which really is a frontier country, and there's still the image of the macho male and the oppressed wife. They do have a lot of problems, and finally they've just got somebody that they can ask about.
What are the problems then?
I would say that the living out the bush, the isolation and the loneliness is a major thing.
Women are lonely in Croydon, aren't they, and Camberwell and Liverpool in the suburbs.
Yeah.
It's not an Australian problem, the lonely housewife, is it?
Oh no, the lonely housewife's there at all, but I mean, it's up to those women to go out. If they walked out their door in the street, they could say hello to 1 million people. I mean, if you walk out your door in the middle of Wave Hill, all you can see is trees and landscape.
Yes, yes.
So I mean, you really are alone. And if you've got a husband in which there's a relationship barrier, I mean, you've got no one to talk to. So that's the difference.
So when they come in here, they find you, they're expecting a grey-haired, mature lady doctor, and they find you...
No, usually they're expecting a man, and they sort of go, a woman doctor? I've never been to a woman doctor
Especially
before.
a swinging chick, isn't it?
Oh, I don't think that matters, it's
That
just the
doesn't.
sex, yeah. I would say on the female side of it.
So they're a bit underwhelmed, are they, when they come in?
Yeah, I would say so.
This myth, perhaps, of the chauvinist Australian husband, is that stereotype accurate?
Well, it is in the Northern Territory.
Why here in the north?
A lot of these men really are bushmen, and they go out bush and they might stay out a couple of months at a time. And you can understand that when you haven't seen a lot of people, they find the town quite overpowering. And all they want to do is sort of get themselves cleaned up, a couple of beers, race around the town. They find it difficult, relationship problems both with other people, and there's usually fights and things, and then females, of course. And as I say, I mean, these guys are probably just as lonely as everyone else, but because of this relationship problem, the mix between females does become difficult, and you do get a lot of neuroses about it in the men.
I noticed to my amazement, a town of this size, on the very fringe of the Never Never here, they have an escort agency here. Is that possible?
I know, I just can't believe it. I mean, that's sort of newly organised as well.
They keep you busy, do they?
Oh, yeah.
How many girls are there operating there?
Oh, I'd say... Well, I'm not really sure. I mean, I would say there's more than 7. Yeah. I've got quite a funny story. The first time they ever came into town, when one girl came in, and she was saying that she was obviously suffering from some sort of infection and could I check her over. So me, you know, interested that this lady's an escort, because I didn't know if they were just dancing partners or whatever, and we don't seem to have many dancers around here. And I'm chatting away to saying, you know, well, how's business then? And she says, oh, actually, I'm just the receptionist and I just fill in when they're busy. And I was astounded.
She helps out.
This woman just helps out when times get rough.
The Australians are a breed apart in many ways, are they not? And here they seem to be the quintessential Australians, don't they, in the Outback. It's the Chips Rafferty, it's the Liverpudlians' idea of an Australian ought to be here in Catherine, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, the beer gut and the singlet and the thongs, yeah. I just feel that Northern Territory, in comparison to, say, Sydney or Perth or anywhere, it's just Outback. It's the land of beyond, it really is. We're still seeing the true blue Aussie with the pig dog and the beer and drinks the stubbies and, oh, beats his wife. It's just amazing.
Have you been stumped here? I mean, have you run into any things that have medical problems that have absolutely stumped you?
No, just the odd men who are pretty stumped to see a female, I would say.
Well, if they're coming in here with VD or something and they're not expecting it.
But that's obvious as soon as they walk in the door, because the face sort of drops in awe of a woman. I didn't expect to see a woman. And it's obvious that...
Then you know what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can usually pick them up. You see if you can break the barrier then by saying, oh, you don't think you've got the clap, have you? That breaks the barrier down for them, and this woman realises that, you know, you might have something like that.
As is traditional, many men are still waltzing their Matildas around Australia in their various ways. But in the cities, where almost all Australians live, a new breed of executive woman can now be seen in control. They're marching to a different tune. A London secretary who came to Australia in 1975 and liked it so much her mother and 4 sisters joined her, Linda Monmouth runs a flourishing marketing company which today, in Sydney's Curzon Hall, is organising a promotion for tea. You wouldn't think they'd need that in Australia. Linda's doing extremely well, but like many executive women, still feels she ought to apologise for her success for being the boss. See, people, they don't expect women to be executives here.
No, they don't.
Men do. I mean, I know a friend of mine here is a woman executive in an hotel, and a very important position. Sonia Smyrna, you probably know her, the Regent. Well. And she comes from an area down below the other side of the tracks, as it were. And she said that when she was going home one day in the tram, she met an old neighbour who she hadn't seen for ages, you know, and he said, how are you? And she said, oh, I'm fine. Where are you working? She said, in an hotel. He assumed instantly that she was a barmaid.
Ah.
And she couldn't bring herself to disabuse him.
Right.
You know, she was something in her, but she couldn't say, no, I've got 12 people working for me.
Yeah. I think also women have another problem same with Sonia, same with myself, is in relationships. Because in order to meet the man that you really want to meet that fulfills the real person, not the image person or the job person, I don't think that man exists. In fact, any of my executive girlfriends, if you like, we're all saying the same thing. It's very hard, so you have to make a compromise.
So how did you compromise?
Well, I can't believe it. I mean, I have spent, I suppose, a fair part of my life, certainly since I've been in Australia, going out with men of the same, not status, but lifestyle, ilk, whatever. And that was really getting me nowhere because it was all one-upmanship. So I fell madly in love with an electrician who I think's great. And we don't have this competition. I mean, he's a ponter, I know, amazing. From north of all places. But we just, work never comes into play because he knows nothing about my line of business. I might occasionally storm home and have a swearing session to myself, and he says, right, you've got 5 minutes, get it off your chest, which is good, because in the past where I've either been out with guys like that or have flatted with, you find that you never switch off because you have a soulmate that understands your work problems and you're constantly talking about work. So that's another problem that,
you see, when I was here earlier this year and I was talking to you about this, and you said you had a boyfriend, you said you wanted to have a baby, but you didn't want to get married.
That's right.
So bring me up to date.
Well, I'm not married and I'm having a baby, basically. Well, I guess, I felt as though I've gone full circle.
So you put the hard word on him, did you?
I did, yes. And he said, oh Christ, what do you want to do that for? Why me? And I said, because, you know, I've been thinking about it for years, and he certainly hasn't. And I said, well, why not? And the discussions were going backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. So in the end, in a weak moment, we came to an agreement, and I think he's not quite sure. Sometimes he's in it, and sometimes he's not.
Never are, actually.
What sort of agreement might that be?
Well, we're just going to play it by ear, basically. I mean,
Well, you can't stop being
no,
pregnant,
you can't.
really, at
No,
the
I don't want
moment.
to be either. I mean, ultimately, it was my decision. I have a good lifestyle. I'm now financially secure, etc., and all those things. And because it's something I've always wanted, and whilst a lot of my friends would say it's a selfish move, I think, you know, even if you're married, it's a selfish move as well, because not all husbands want babies either.
But if you don't want to marry him, then...
Oh, yes, but I'd still like him to be around.
I mean, you
So-
could have gone to a sperm bank.
No way! I love this man very much. I couldn't bear anything more revolting. Yeah. No, but I must tell you a very funny story. Kimberly Clark, client I picked up here, they didn't have quite enough money in the budget for us. And they didn't know at this time that I was pregnant. And so I said, well, look, I tell you what, they manufacture snugglers, you know, the nappies? Disposable nappies. I thought, God, they'd be coming in handy. I said, why don't we do a contra deal, which I think you call bartering in England. I've forgotten what the term is. So they said, OK, fair enough. So I've got 5,000 nappies to start off with.
Jane Deknatel from Oxford was a film producer living in Beverly Hills, a real-life Alexis Carrington who followed Dynasty's Joan Collins into the last Whicker's World Series on America. But a couple of years later, when I reached Sydney, there she was again, living and working, and still at the top of the pile. She'd come to Australia with her two daughters to run Kerry Packer's film company. After Hollywood's ruthless, hard-driving, hire-and-fire dynasty lifestyle, Jane was not prepared for the easygoing scene down under. Nor, indeed, was the Sydney film world quite ready for her. She inherited 25 Australian staff and instantly fired 23.
Oh, God.
Being powerful in Hollywood, a woman being powerful in Hollywood, is an accepted thing. Being a woman being powerful in Australia is not. This is quite unusual.
Yes, it is quite unusual. And I think that when I first came here, that the Australians had a hard time with me, and I wasn't quite sure whether it was because I was a woman doing what I do, or whether I was perceived as an American, which indeed I was in the beginning. And then I think when they finally discovered I was English, it was even worse.
A pom.
Because I was a pom who had gone to America, made it,
pom.
and came here, yes.
So did they take a guinea?
No, I think that's too strong. I think that there was a great deal of resistance. I mean, I didn't quite understand how it was or what it was like. All I knew was that whenever I tried to do anything, there was sort of nothing happened, which I wasn't used to.
Now, the women are frightened you're going to pinch their husbands, and the men are frightened you're going to fire them.
Yes, maybe you're right. I found it very difficult socially when I first came here. And I also found the whole sort of work ethic thing quite difficult.
How difficult, and why was it difficult socially?
I think the Australians, who are very straightforward and very generous when you get to know them, and I, think I've made some friends here that I'll have for life, are more like the English and less like the Americans when it really comes down to brass tacks. And I think that they all assumed that I would be busy and have important people for dinner. I mean, I don't know what, but it was sort of too scary. I mean, I think that was part of it. I think being single and being female was another part of it. Australians are very into having equal numbers at dinner. And so I would get this kind of tentative phone call saying, do come for dinner and bring somebody. And I'd say, well, I don't want to bring somebody, or I don't know anybody. I mean, the reality was, who was I going to take?
What about business-wise? I mean, when you arrived to take over the company as a hired gun, what happened?
Well, The first thing that happened was the day I arrived, I walked into the office, and the man who I was replacing, who had resigned to do something else, was very kind and took me around to introduce me to everybody. And in the conference room, there were about 6 or 8 men working. I later discovered they were the writers and directors on a mini-series that we were about to shoot. And he walked in and he said, "This is Jane Deknatel, she's the new managing director of PBL." Nobody stood up, and 2 of the young men just laughed and said, "Oh yes, right, very funny."
I suppose if you have taken the guillotine to a number of people, you're not, you can't expect to be popular with the people you find, can you?
No, of course not. But I don't try to be popular. I mean, I'm supposed to be running a company and being profitable and making money and entertaining people. I mean, I do it with a great deal of charm.
Can you explain that to me?
No, I mean, I had to fire somebody when I first arrived.
Who was?
Who had been with the company for a while, and who I thought was behaving inappropriately over a considerable period of time, and we continued to have those conversations about it. And finally the day came when I knew I was going to have to terminate him. And I said, you know, I'm sorry to have to do this, but we have discussed this issue several times, and this is the end. And so I would give you a fairly generous settlement because you've been with the company for a period of time, but I really think the best thing is not to go back to the office and come in on the weekend and collect your things, and we'll send the check to the house and so on and so forth. And he leant over and tapped me on the knee and said, there, dear, I'm sure we'll work this out. Let's go back to the office." And I said, "I don't think you quite have understood what I was trying to say." Well, he got the message about 3 seconds later, but, you know, I was amazed, because in America, if you said that to somebody, they'd have been out the door in 10 seconds, you know. So it was hard.
Women are easier to fire?
Oh, no, I think they're harder.
Because...
Oh, I think it's harder for me to fire women because I know how difficult it is for women to survive in the marketplace, and you do have to work harder, and you do have to do all those things better. And so it's hard.
I remember when we talked like this.
Yes.
A year or 2 ago, you said that the pendulum was swinging against women. Women had achieved so much, but you saw it. Has that in fact happened?
I think that's absolutely true.
Still?
Yes, I do. I think there's still a backlash in operation. I think as you hit recessions and you hit conservative times, there is always that swing to put women back in the kitchen, or certainly take them out of the workforce. You know, men are the people who support families, women are not, and therefore women should get out of the way.
From England, Australia's always looked like a rather chauvinistic country, has it not? And that on the principle that men are one end of the room and women are the other, and talking about babies and formula food, that sort of thing.
Well, I think that's true, but I think...
Have you met that?
No, you see, because I think what is happening now is that men at one end of the room talking about their feelings and being sensitive, and women at the other end of the room talking about their stock options, you know. I mean, I actually think that's what's happening.
Her role as a ruling executive changed abruptly soon afterwards when Alan Bond bought most of Packer's communications empire for £422 million. The very next day, removal men arrived in Jane's office, disconnected the phones and took away the furniture. It was, after all, rather more dynasty than Sydney.
Let's go, Edwin! Divine music. Watch. 1, 2, 3, and go.
This is Keep Fit Television 1972, a BBC Bristol programme called Bump with Becca, with Sue Becker presiding like Auntie Mame in a leotard.
Drop. 1, 2, 3, and go. Magnificent. Arms up, Keith Labby. Drop. Ooh, come on. Dum-dums in. Once more down. Come on, Jimmy, push. You're not bad, you know. That's got to be in. You know, jolly good. Don't stop. Go on. Up and push. 2, 3, and rock. Bounce.
Afterwards, she went to New Guinea, married, divorced, reached Australia, and fell for Tasmania, where today she lives and runs not an exercise class, but an outspoken radio program. Listening to local broadcasting, I found her throaty English accent the significant sound of the island, so submitted, greatly daring, to one of her interviews.
Good morning, everybody. And that was the theme tune, of course, of Whicker's World. It was a BBC television travel series that I suppose went almost throughout the world. And our guest this morning, Alan Whicker of Whicker's World. And a warm welcome to Becca's Broadsides, Alan.
Thank you, sir.
Who's interviewing whom on this programme?
Her programme's now called, with no reflection upon a still lithe figure, Becca's Broadside.
It's basically very different for you to be interviewed, isn't it?
Yes, I don't enjoy it, I have to say. I don't enjoy it.
Now, that's interesting. You don't enjoy it. Does it ever strike you that some of the guests might feel the same?
No, all my guests love being interviewed by me.
You've never had a failure?
No, I'm sure I've had endless failures,
But you must have had people very nervous.
Sometimes people are a little bit nervous, but very rarely, really, because, I mean, I don't do interviews. All I have is conversations. Whicker's World is a collection of conversations with friends or close acquaintances. Call it force of habit, but I couldn't avoid offering Becca a broadside. You've still got the boomph with Becca, but has Tasmania got the oomph?
It's got it in little pockets. I don't know if I'm ever going to be allowed on this programme again after this. It has, and they're hidden. On the surface, they seem very reserved and conformist. But there are little pockets in Tasmania where you will find the most individual, the most fascinating, intellectual, interesting people. But you've got to go and dig them out. They're not there out there. They don't come into the programme often. They're listening, but they're not out in the public arena.
Somebody says Tasmania is 30 years behind the mainland.
I thought 50, actually.
Uh-huh.
But that's its charm, isn't it? Thank you very much for the programme. And we hope to see your series, Whicker Down Under.
Thank you, sir. She lives alone in a pretty 1820 house on a wide tree-lined avenue where, in her lovingly tended English country garden, we considered life in Tasmania. See, it's the only state which doesn't allow, I don't know, vending machines for condoms, and
oh, no.
Homosexuality is illegal. I mean, it's...
And we don't allow syringes to be sold across the counter. We've still got quite extraordinary laws against rape in marriage. I think it's going to be changed. Yes, we move very, very slowly in Tasmania.
I mean, is there anything you wouldn't talk about on air?
Incest.
Is that all?
I think so. I've spoken about homosexuality, naturally, with AIDS, which is a big problem. Drink. Incest. That is a very sensitive subject in an island, as you would know. I think there is more incest in an island, but it's had to be raised because the whole country's been aware of it after raising sexual and child abuse. But it is difficult to do it in a place like Tasmania because everybody knows everybody. And what is interesting is that incest has been proved to go right across the board. It doesn't know social barriers. So you have your professional as well as your less educated man committing acts of incest.
Is this a good place for a lone woman?
Australia? Not really, much better than it was. I think America is the ideal for a lone woman. Americans don't have hang-ups about career women. They rather enjoy women who are independent and go out to do their own thing. I think Australians are still, particularly in Tasmania, a little bit wary of career-minded women and very independent.
I get the impression Tasmanian women don't have much say outside the kitchen.
No, I will never forget at a dinner party. It struck home so vividly. I was having a great discussion
They would have called it argument. I would have called it debate about something or other. And I seemed to be the lone woman battling. It certainly wasn't about the women's movement, it was something else. And when we went into the kitchen to make coffee, the hostess said, "I'm so glad you said that, Sue. We need women to speak up for us like that." But it never struck her to speak up to.
But she could, yes. But I detect here in Australia that people refer to others as outspoken, and this is rather pejorative. They're saying he's rather outspoken. It's saying it's a pity, but, but he talks too much, you know, or he's got too many views.
That's a label I wear very much around my neck.
Outspoken, it's not a good thing to be outspoken.
Very
You're sticking your neck out. Well, now then you're in danger of becoming a tall poppy, of course.
Yes, the tall poppy and the conformist.
How long does it take to be accepted here?
In Tasmania? I'm told 30 years.
You've been here 16?
I've been 6, so I'm really 6 years.
Only 6?
Yes. So I'm a real greenhorn. Well, I just sort of barge on regardless. I say, well, look, love, my home's here. I pay my tax here. I have no money anywhere else, so I don't have any money, period, but never mind. And so I consider myself a Tasmanian, but it does come up on dicey subjects, controversial subjects we're discussing on air, such as tourism, when I tell them to wake up and get with it. Then they'll say, if you don't like it, why don't you go back to where you belong? This is this defensiveness, which I understand. Tasmania is so small compared with the rest. And of course, outside, I am as defensive of Tasmania as any true Tasmanian.
Of course, one gets
but inside,
very loyal and proud.
That's right.
Yeah.
But inside, I feel we must tackle the problems and face them.
It's still rather a chauvinistic society. I get the feeling that the Tasmanian woman's place is in the kitchen.
Yes, or in the bed and flat in the back, you know, sometimes. Yes, we are. I think Tasmanian men are still basically frightened of career-orientated or independent-thinking women.
Yes, and so you suffer, do you?
Yes, I always get the impression the men sort of reverse gear when I come along, you know, 3 steps back. They're a bit frightened of me.
Because you're the dragon lady, you see. You're going to put them right.
Yes, you used the term dragon. Was that how somebody described me, or was that yours?
No, it was one of mine.
But do you see me as a dragon lady?
No, of course not. But I suspect they do, yes.
Yes, they do. But this is the interesting part. Male men don't see me in that way. Neither do Europeans. I always hit it off with European men. If there's one in a party in Tasmania, we'll end up somewhere together, Europeans. They're not frightened of me. I think a lot of them love me now because I've been here long enough. I've sort of almost become part of their routine or their furniture. And I think they respect me. But there are an awful lot who dislike me intensely, and it all started off with the voice. Who is this woman with this pommy accent and ginny voice?
Yeah.
Because it was different. But I really think the majority now have accepted that I'm genuine. But I do irritate thousands of them.
So it seems to me you've got your life very well organised here, just as your home is beautifully organised. Are you ever lonely here?
Oh, yes. I think any woman who lives on her own is lonely, Alan, if they'd only admit it. I don't really think it's a natural state to be in, not to share your life. But you've got to weigh up. I am a very independent person. I mean, I have been married, of course, and have a gorgeous son. But you've got to weigh up the pros and cons. And I know that I'm very independent. I know that I must work. I simply cannot just sit down and sort of hoover the carpet and wash the dishes. It just isn't enough for me. And I realise that men basically don't want that in a woman. I don't think they do. I think they want a woman that is the homemaker, that does, you know, listen to him for the final word, turns to him for final decisions. I need that in a man. I mean, I'm not interested in weak men. Strong ones are getting rarer and rarer. And I've never been interested in wishy-washy men. And the wishy-washy men are the ones who are petrified of me, which is so interesting. The very quiet, secure male just tells me to shut up and sit down and listen. And of course I do. So I've had to make my choice. I would have loved to have got married again. But I know that being what I am makes it difficult for a man to choose me as a partner. So I think I've accepted that and will live in peace, but with those great periods of loneliness. It's inevitable. And life's a compromise, they say, but I could never do with a half-baked husband. I mean, he's got to be all or nothing at all. He's got to be totally yummy, or I don't want him. Somebody like you, dear.
There's still a noticeable amount of boomph in Becca. And also come to that in Hazel Small, a hairdresser from Aberdeen who's been in Australia for 15 years. She's just bought this 60-year-old rectory from St Clement's Anglican Church at Stafford, a suburb of Brisbane, though she has no intention of living here. For she and her fiancé have 140 acres up at Blackbutt, in empty country 100 miles to the north, so the rectory's just been cut in half, and tonight, with any luck, it'll be transported there by road, and then stuck together again to form an instant home somewhere else. She reckons this old Queenslander house would cost about $50,000 to build today, but they've paid less than half that for the place as it stands, with transportation and resettlement upon concrete piles in a far better area. But how do you feel when they cut it in two? Did it hurt you right here, did it?
Not at all. The anticipation of the move is too much to worry about, and I'm sure that the removalists will do an excellent job.
You felt a pain in the wallet, did you, when you saw it?
Hip pocket, yes.
Now, I mean, what happens if it falls off the back of a lorry?
We have to look for another house.
Now, do you think it'll ever fit together again? When a car is in an accident and people stick it together again, it's never quite right, is it? There's always a few rattles. Aren't you going to find a draft through the living room?
Certainly hope not. What you said about the car, it was smashed. This has been carefully dissected.
Come on, what are you talking about?
It's been sawn with the tenderest loving care.
They look as if they took a chopper to it. What are you talking about? You see, without wishing to be rude, it looks to me like a rather decrepit old cricket pavilion.
Now, Alan, you never judge a book by its cover.
They were moving home at midnight to avoid snarling Brisbane's traffic, and, come the dawn, miraculously, the rector's home was still in one piece. Or rather, two pieces. So the house of your dreams arriving across a ploughed field.
Yes, finally. I thought we'd never get here.
And where's the front door going to be?
And that'll sort of be situated there, so that the lounge room is over on that corner, which will face out to those mountains.
Out to this wonderful view.
Yeah, some of those trees will be cut down eventually, but it's a bit hard to visualise at the moment, I'd say.
But, I mean, within a few minutes, you won't be able to change your mind, will you?
True.
Once it's down.
That's it.
But it doesn't look as though this is a place where you can just plug into the mains, does it?
Oh, no, far from it, let me tell you. But I think that's all part of the excitement of it, is sort of building up ourselves.
When will the chandelier go up, and when will you move in? In about an hour's time.
That's right, breakfast is on me. Well, you know, it will be livable within a week.
Will it?
Yes. It's just a case of getting the electricity across and the telephone put on eventually, of course. The water.
And you'll have a septic tank and that
Septic
sort of
tank, that takes about 2 days to put in.
What do you think could go wrong? I mean, Australian women are very resourceful, aren't they?
So, Scottish are extremely pioneering.
That's true, yes. That's true.
Most definitely.
What are you expecting might go wrong here?
Nothing.
Perfect.
Absolutely. That's the only way to think.
Think positive.
You bet.
I'm sure you're right. Well, it's gone very smoothly up to now.
Actually, it really has. I think that Pat Wright has to be commended.
How could I call that a cricket pavilion? You can see.
It does look a lot like
the luxury of it.
At the moment, sure. I mean, yes.
A wee bit sad, right?
Yes.
No, but I'm sure once you get your magic fingers organised and you've changed the curtains.
Yes. Painted it inside and out and have my own furniture in it, it'll be wonderful. Can't wait.
Here comes the sun. It's all symbolic.
Yes,
Everything's happening absolutely right on cue.
Next Tuesday at 8, Whicker looks at industry in Australia from the point of view of those on the factory floor to the attitudes of industry chiefs who have to battle against restrictive union